So conflicted and torn as to what goes through people's minds anytime anything happens like what did in Minneapolis, and then the responses from the people that are in leadership. I've talked about what leadership is, and it's disappointing, and I'm going to use the term disappointing more than anything when adults conduct themselves in a very not adult manner, especially when they're put in places of power and responsibility. And I think the thing that probably comes with each position is more so responsibility rather than the ability to project or wield power. I even look around at the way that China is interacting with Hong Kong right now, and that is pertinent to me because my sister lives in Hong Kong, and it certainly isn't what was promised. Two systems, one government or one country. If I were Taiwan, I would never want to be associated with mainland China. And I think just all of these are broader, much larger elements of the Silk Road Initiative that China is taking on now to project soft, which is political and economic power across the world, and then also hard power, like in the South China Sea, where they're developing literally islands where they're just making naval bases out of them. It just gives me a lot of pause, a lot of stuff to think about. That I always hope for more, I guess. But from a historical perspective, governments and people respond to incentives, and the incentives that exist out there are, things like survival of for example, a country. Bashar al-Assad I hope I got that right, in Syria. I mean, that guy's just responding to the incentive to perpetuate what he's been doing his whole life and what he's been doing in his country. Same with North Korea. They're just trying to perpetuate the cult of their personality that has ruled the country, the Uns, for as long as it's existed. And then for places like China, they're just trying to perpetuate their position in the world and trying to increase their standing. I don't know if they do it for selfish individual gains, which is what I see with people like Vladimir Putin, who are, what is the term? Not self-involved, but I mean, I don't think he's doing what he's doing for the good of Russia. His attempt to maintain power is just that, an attempt to maintain power, much like what you saw with Saddam Hussein back in the day in Iraq, and just different leaders all over the world. Very rarely do you see leadership that is truly selfless and centered upon a task. I think one of those people that I saw that from, and I don't know if I use the term selfless, but Winston Churchill's ability to lead the British government during World War II seemed very pragmatic. Maybe Margaret Thatcher is another one that I would think of like that. In the United States, I think most of the presidents that were in power during World War I, World War II were again very pragmatic in their approach, that there was very little that they could choose or decide about what they were going to do and how they were going to lead the country, and more so real decisions that had to be made. I think during the periods of the Korean War and the Vietnam War, those decisions were much more arbitrary, and our decisions to project hard power in the world had real consequences in the death of American citizens when it didn't necessarily have to. I think a lot of people would argue and say that we didn't necessarily have choices to not go to war. There was a history of the world, it was written by a Cambridge professor that I read, that was all revolved around a very Asiatic-centric history of the world, basically looking at Iraq as the center of the world and control over the trade when it was the Silk Roads, and then moving into oil production, and how that really is what drove most of the decisions of the countries that were involved in that area all during that time. Like, a lot of people would complain about the United States being involved there, or Great Britain being involved there, anybody from Europe being involved in those areas. But to me, it goes back to incentives. And if you are a country, why you're doing what you do. So nothing happens in a vacuum. Disappointment is part of life. But I really hope that there are better days ahead for our country and better days for everyone who lives here, and safety and security. So take care of yourselves and have a great day.